Hey everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on ParanormalZoneTV. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. And for those who may be new to the show, if you would please subscribe to my channel, I'd appreciate it. And also guys, don't forget to give the show a like. Now tonight I'm really excited. We have Paul Eno back. And guess what? He also has his son with him tonight, which I'm really excited because this will be the first time for Ben. Now, Paul Eno and Ben Eno, they are authors and radio show hosts of Behind the Paranormal. Here, let me show you their picture. And their website is www.behindtheparanormal.com. Now, Paul and Ben have a newly published book called Behind the Paranormal, and everything you know is wrong. So, let's welcome Paul and Ben to the show, everyone. Thanks so much, Paul and Ben. I'm really excited to have you on the show tonight.
Well, it's exciting to be here.
It's great to be with you again, Norene.
Now, before we start the show, Paul, would you please tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we continue on with the show?
Okay, I guess everything in my life happened by mistake or accident. I don't know. I was studying for the priesthood in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and I became interested in the paranormal for a number of reasons. And I went to test a theory about it and ended up investigating some very interesting cases. But by 1977, the seminary authorities had had enough of me and thought I should be keeping my nose in my books. And they threw me out about 2 years maybe before ordination. They didn't want to talk to me. So what else could I do? The only other thing I could do was write, so I ended up, just by dumb luck, getting into a career in journalism, never having taken a journalism course. So I was really lucky there, and I've been a journalist ever since, newspapers and magazines, particularly in Rhode Island. And so it's been 46 years this year since I've been investigating the paranormal. I have a number of adventures and that sort of thing, so I consider it part of my work as a journalist.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Ben, this is the first time you're on my show. Would you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this paranormal field with your dad?
Oh,
I want to know this story.
Kind of keep it short.
When I got involved was I was born.
That's all it took.
That's really how it all started. I went to every single lecture that my father ever, gave since I was 6 years old, so I can probably repeat word for word everything he said.
So you don't need me. See you later.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember the days when they were slideshows, like actual film slides and all of that stuff. God, that was forever ago. So that's really what started my, I don't want to say interest, sort of ministry in the paranormal. I don't want to call it an interest because it's more than a hobby, so to speak. It's more of a way of life, I suppose, that my father sort of taught me through happenstance and our experiences and adventures together, in a way. I ended up after high school. I went to community college, got a degree in general education. Went to Emerson College, got a degree in audio engineering, so I could one of the side effects of that is now I can give some pretty educated guesses on what EVPs are. Again, they're guesses, just going to emphasize that. And let's see, what else about me? I do a lot of things.
Well,
a lot of things are done.
I suppose in another happenstance way, we kind of complement each other from my point of view, because I try and take a very feet on the ground. So do you. But very almost a scholarly approach to the paranormal, and comparing experiences with areas of science that I do not have degrees in. I have a degree in philosophy, but you seem to go farther, and you experience the paranormal in ways that I don't, and maybe I experience in ways that you don't. So I think we're kind of a good team. I think we always have been.
Yeah, Dad.
From that point of view.
So everyone that's watching the show, there's a description underneath this video, and their bios are, if you want to read more about Paul and Ben, their bios will be under the video, and you can read more about them. then tonight our topic is Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. It's their newly published book. There you go, Paul. Awesome. All right, so oh my God, this book is absolutely amazing. There is and it's everything I love about the paranormal. There are so many topics included in this book. And Paul, I don't even know where you want to start. I know this is the book, you start the book as it's a journey through the paranormal from prehistory to the planets and our future. Can you kind of explain that?
25 words or less, Norene?
Okay.
Okay. Well, we believe that the paranormal has been really the background of the entire human experience. I think that our religion and our science resulted really from paranormal experiences of our remote ancestors. If they hadn't encountered beings they believed to be supernatural and had not had simply questions to answer, ultimate questions like, why did my child die in the jaws of some saber-toothed cat, things of that kind, basic life questions. If there hadn't been any questions like that, if there'd been nothing to explain, then I think you might not have had a need for science or religion. So in a way, science and religion that are so supposed to be so much at odds in our popular minds really are not, and are children, both of them, of the paranormal. So we start the book with probably the earliest memory of our civilization, which is really God in the book of Genesis and in several other non-Jewish documents, contemporary documents from the period approximately, well, they could go back as far as 10,000 years in their roots. Documents of the Sumerian civilization and the Akkadian civilization, the first known empire. And we trace that through the simple word Elohim, the first name for God used really in Western history, which is a very funny word because it's a feminine word with a masculine plural ending. There's no other word like it in any Semitic language. And it means, literally translated, the shining ones, plural. I mean, what the hey is that about, right? Mm-hmm. So that we go through that, and we go through other areas in which the paranormal has influenced human history. For example, the Spectre Leaguers, something probably most people never heard of, but which was reported. We're an old Yankee New England family, so one of our first cousins from the 1600s, many times removed, was the Reverend John Emerson, who reported this occurring on Cape Ann, where Salem is to this day. And we think that these odd happenings may have triggered, or at least put the paranormal in people's minds, so that the Salem witchcraft hysteria took place. Oh. Very historical event. We have a story of George Washington and the angel. Now, these are things we did not investigate personally, obviously because of the separation in time, but they rang bells with us, and so we put them in the book. We have a story from Canada about how a ghost reportedly helped one of the best governors general Canada ever had. The mystery of the Battle Hymn of the Republic and the paranormal overtones about how that was written by another cousin of ours, Julia Ward Howe. And then angels on the battlefield, various things of that kind. Abraham Lincoln, the paranormal president, and various things. And then we move on to science and the paranormal, right. And we look at how we know anything. And the whole point is everything we know is wrong. We don't know anything, really, in any objective way. And our favorite, well, not so favorite philosopher,
Rene Descartes,
yep, came across with this idea. He was a mathematician and a philosopher, and he said, I think, therefore I am. Je pense donc je suis, because it was French. And this is the idea that because I can think,
I exist.
I exist. And that's the beginning of all the acquisition of knowledge.
Well, the idea was to create hyperbolic situations where, all right, well, how do I know I'm dreaming? I don't know I'm dreaming. Or how do I know I'm not underwater? I don't know if I'm underwater. That kind of thing, using empirical evidence to figure out if you really exist.
So we blow that out of the water in chapter 2. And then we get into winter holidays, angels, and miracles. Right. Kind of a spread there. But the winter holidays, Halloween, Hanukkah, Christmas, and all the rather amazing paranormal overtones that these have, going back to the remote period. And we tie into the knowledge of some people I researched over a long period of time. The Aboriginal people of Australia, the Andaman and Nicobar Islanders of the Indian Ocean area, and we're talking about cultures that go back a minimum of 30,000 years of unbroken tradition. And the Bushmen of Africa, the San and Khoisan Bushmen, their DNA goes back of like 150,000 years. I mean, these are people who really knew where they were and what they were doing. So we tie into that for some of the background of a lot of these things. And then we get into Chapter 4, the good old subjects of ghosts, parasites, and poltergeists. I get into the Amityville case, and I have to dig out sometime Lorraine Warren's letters to me during that case, and I couldn't get involved in it. This is the Amityville Horror was based on this, the book and the movies. I couldn't get involved because I was in the seminary in my class schedule, at the other end of New York State. The Queen Mary, we get into that, and demons or parasites, things we've talked about on the show many times before. And then Poltergeist's attack in Chapter 4, and that was my experience in the Bridgeport, Connecticut house with Ed and Lorraine Warren in 1974. A very, very famous case now. The next chapter, we get into paranormal love and beauty. You don't often think of this sort of thing. Various things we've done a case in Maine where we encountered some interesting things that were very positive alongside things that were negative. We look at the work of psychics and mediums and how legitimate it might be, and other things of this kind. We get into my first case, which is the Village of Voices case in Connecticut that we have discussed as well. And then Chapter 7 has to do with suicide. And this is all these things are based on radio scripts that we did over the years from 2008 on CBS radio and on our current station, WON 1240 in the Boston Providence area. And we did a show when we first went to ON. We had a Saturday morning slot, the worst time in the world to have a radio.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah, but enough people heard it so that it became one of our most popular early shows. And you wouldn't think suicide would be a very appealing topic, but we get into teen suicide. We talked about it as a father and a son. And people were listening, and they told us that they burst into tears, and that they went home and hugged their children or their parents or whatever. So we figured we better put that in the book, because it sounded like something that hit a nerve. And then in the 8th chapter, we talk about strange places. And this is what really got me thinking, and then because I had a profound influence on Ben as a child, that these old ideas about ghosts being spirits of the dead and all this sort of thing, what was not good enough, because the Strange Places chapter talks about disappearing houses, buildings that were there one day and gone the next, whole villages and towns, islands. So there's a lot more to the ghost thing, as it were, than people may think. And the final section of that chapter is one of the favorite stories of your listeners, your viewers, Norene, and that's the death at Dyatlov Pass. That was one of the most popular shows we did.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Oh, no. The haunted house. The most haunted house in the one that.
That was the Bridgeport Poltergeist. Yeah, that's in there too.
Oh, God.
That's based on I expanded my original report of it that I wrote in 1975 and published in 1998, and that's in there too. Then we get into Chapter 9, the paranormal and the family, kids and cults, that sort of thing. And then Chapter 10 is simply about evil. Why did God allow this kind of thing? Now, it's interesting. We did that on ON and CBS, and both of the podcasts or the recorded shows disappeared.
Yeah, it's never happened before.
No, it never happened before or since.
There was one other time that it happened, but it was explainable.
It was explainable. And these were not, so I don't know what was going on here, but we decided we better take the script, turn it into a chapter, and put it in the book, which we did.
Yeah.
Then there is Possession and Exorcism, Chapter 11, and I've unfortunately had some experience with that, not for a while, but I talk about my experiences in Haiti with the voodoo people.
Oh, dear.
And then the channeling, what that might really be, parasites, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's in Chapter 11. Chapter 12 is something completely different. I guess Paranormal Lives of the Saints.
Now for something completely different.
Yes. And we talk about one of the local saints here, well, at least someone who was reputed to be a saint here in northern Rhode Island, Little Rose, as she was called, Marie Rose Farron, flying prophets, and an uplifting story which had to do with St. Mary of Egypt, who was a prostitute, notorious prostitute, changed her life and became so holy that she could levitate over the desert. And of course, Joan of Arc, and then St. Alphonsus Liguori, who was a lawyer. So even a lawyer can become a saint. So that was pretty spectacular. So, and then chapter 13, Animals and the Paranormal, the funeral customs of chimps, compassionate cats. These are our cats that we observed when Ben was little at our old place in the woods, and some of the most amazing things would happen, indicating great knowledge, perhaps even spirituality, reverence for other creatures, including potential prey, adopting baby rabbits, and we saw them do this. Groundhog Day, Wyatt the ghost hunting dog, animal ghosts, the phantom deer, one of the most beautiful experiences I ever had in my life, and then the unexplained kangaroo outbreak in the Midwestern U.S. in the 1960s. And then finally, at chapter 14, what is heaven? Question on everyone's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we go through the various traditions from the Aboriginals, and I heard that right out of the mouth of an Aboriginal elder when I was in Australia in 1979. The Sumerian ideas, the Jewish ideas, Christian ideas, everybody else's ideas, and our own ideas. And finally, an epilogue that I wrote just myself, and that was something about the good world, which is a very long story, and we talked about it first on Coast to Coast thing, in 2011, and we had a long discussion about whether we should go public with this thing. And when we did, George Norene, who is, he's no slouch when it comes to hearing weird things, and he said he'd never heard us this far out before. So I won't talk about much of it unless you want me to, but people can read the book.
Oh yeah.
And, but we thought that it was so crazy that the whole country would consider us nuts. But we got over 3,000 emails, only 2 of which were negative. And one guy later apologized. All the rest were people saying they had the same experience or similar experiences, related things we had not mentioned that we had also experienced. So this is how the book ends. And so it's, as you say, it's kind of heard just about everything in there. For treatment from our point of view.
Oh, yeah.
And our idea is that the whole pattern behind it is not what people think it is.
Okay. Now, with these chapters, would you be willing to take one topic out of each one of your chapters and talk about it?
We could do that.
Okay. But also I wanted to mention... What?
Hmm?
I wanted to also mention that you've also stated in the about of your book that you have over 50 bizarre cases of ghosts, poltergeists, demons, cryptids, UFOs, and out of the ordinary phenomena. Also, you said your research has revealed bizarre connections not only between the seemingly unrelated occurrences, but also between the paranormal and our everyday lives, and the history of our species and our possible future as a race. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, tell them about the multiverse, man.
Oh, yes. I feel like you always toss me the multiverse questions.
Well, you're good at it.
I guess, yeah. Well, I'm very relatable. So, you wash your hands in a sink. You use soap or whatever, and you see the soap bubbles in the sink, and some of the bubbles pass through each other. Some of the bubbles expand. Some of the bubbles pop. Some of the bubbles get bigger, smaller, whatever. That's essentially the multiverse. And the multiverse is essentially the apex of the multiple worlds interpretation of quantum physics that suggests that that there are completely separate worlds that we exist in at all times, where all possibilities are possible. So, for instance, I could take my water over here and throw it on the computer and ruin the whole interview by destroying the computer.
Yeah.
Or I could push my dad over, and both of those things would create 2 entirely different universes in which I had done those things. Or for example, I could be the computer, you could be the computer, we could all be computers, and we're actually talking to a person. That kind of thing.
That's why indigenous peoples say everything has a spirit, even if we think it's inanimate. That sort of. So the point being that the back, as we said in the beginning, the background between all of all human existence really is the same process that allows paranormal phenomena to take place. For example, you're walking down the street and you see your granddaughter or grandmother who died in 1920 driving down the street in a Model T. This kind of thing happens. So you may be bonkers, but chances are you're not, and that you're experiencing you're having a multiverse intersect experience. You are not seeing her ghost, let alone the ghost of a car, in our opinion.
You're actually seeing her in her actual car going about her daily life in an entirely physical world.
That's right. And this is the sort of thing that is the background, we believe, to all things. We usually don't experience it in such a dramatic way because we proceed through various worlds during our day, perhaps millions of them. Hollywood, of course, never gets it right anyway. There was an old program called Sliders, or Quantum Leap.
Oh, Quantum Leap, yeah.
Where you leap from one bubble, as it were, to another, from one world to another, and things are a little different. We don't think that's really how it works, and neither do most physicists who believe it this way. There are thousands of these bubbles. You're always passing through them. But our mass consciousness, maybe the whole consciousness of the whole biosphere, all living things, keeps it in a logical way. For example, there really is no such thing as time. And Einstein started to prove that, and others finished the proofs. So you're proceeding through these things in a time that there really is not from past to future, but that's just how we experience it. It really doesn't objectively exist that way. All things, past and future, all these worlds, everything Ben said about possibility, it all exists at the same time. And it's our consciousness that keeps us from moving from one logical world to another. For example, you come in, put your car keys down. How many times does this happen? And you turn around and they're gone, or they're the other end of the table. And you don't pay any attention to it as one of those things. Maybe I just did put it down, didn't remember. And that could be, but very often it probably is a little glitch in the procession from one world to another. And this essentially is why we believe, and nobody sees it that way. Very few people see it that way. We think of material world and a spirit world, and that's it. And you cross one to the other. And, it's all rather boring and two-dimensional. But we don't think that's the way it is at all. So we think everything we know is wrong. Because this changes everything about our history, about our whole view of God and spirituality, about our whole view of ourselves and each other. There are little illustrations of this, and I think I've used them on the show before. One that always comes to me is when Ben was just a little lad, or you might not, you were a baby, and your brother and I went to Mount Ida College up near Boston, and I got a big kick out of that because half the students are studying to be undertakers, right? And they had me come in and give a program, and I had been talking about human relationships within the multiverse. So at the end, I'm sitting in a chair like Santa Claus, and all the kids are coming up in pairs telling me their own experiences. And two young girls came up, they were freshmen, and they said, why is it that we had never seen each other before, but on registration day, we caught each other's eye, and all of a sudden, we knew each other, we were sisters from day one, and they've been terrific friends ever since. So I said, well, probably because at some point in this multiverse, in one of a number of worlds, you literally are one another. They knew exactly what I was talking about, and they went scurrying happily away, having figured out this mystery. And I think that very often when we say this, people will say, aha, that's what it's about, or this has happened to me all my life and I never understood it, or the thing we like to hear most. Now we understand it, and we don't have to be afraid of it anymore. So I think that we're looking at a whole new view of the paranormal here, and that's what we try to set out in the book, using examples that people may have heard and examples people may not have heard, many of them from our own experience.
Oh my gosh. Also, meet inner-world parasites that might be farming your family or community. Encounter, okay, we'll do that, okay, because there's more to that. Parasites that might be farming your family, can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a funny way to put it, but we think that's exactly what's happening.
It's full of alliterations, but
Yes, it is. And we always talk about folklore being the vessel of the memory of the human race. And any student of folklore will tell you that everything that comes down to us, no matter how goofy, legends, jokes, urban legends, like the woman who finds this little dog and it turns out to be this dangerous rat or something. I actually heard, Mom came home one day and told me that one of the lawyers in the office had heard from another lawyer that she had, in Providence, which is a port city, had, so it's amazing how these things get repeated.
Yeah, but there's a Tasmanian devil or something. I don't remember.
Yeah, wombat.
Wombat.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, whether this happened is but it's an old urban legend. So the background of these things is that we interpret them in ways that we can understand. And for our purposes, think of demons, evil spirits, vampires. I mean, these are things that come down to us in history and folklore and in many, many stories and legends. Well, if you look at the paranormal from our point of view, you can explain the grains of truth from which those legends came. And they are these parasites. And we believe that parasites, paranormal parasites, are responsible for our legends, not only of these, even vampires, because the ancient Babylonians described them as what?
Life-sucking ghosts.
Life-sucking ghosts, exactly. That's how it translates. And that's what these things do. Naturally, people didn't understand quantum physics and the interplay of parallel realities and this sort of thing, and quantum effects. Or maybe they did. I think our remote ancestors did, but then they probably forgot it.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Or sort of thing, or quantum effects, this sort of thing. And you would see grandma driving by or walking by after her funeral, and you say, aha, what else could it be but her remnant, her spirit or her soul? And the fact that she may be wearing clothes or driving a car, that somehow that doesn't, affect your point of view on that, which always surprised me. Where they're ghosts of cars and this sort of thing.
Ghosts of clothes.
Clothes and all that business. So there's a road here into a whole new point of view on the paranormal. And the parasites are, as we've discussed on previous shows, living beings, life forms that seem to operate among different worlds. Now, the thing we know about life, Norene, is that it is everywhere, it is everywhere, and it is very persistent and can survive under amazingly difficult conditions. Microbes have been found in the cores of nuclear reactors. I mean, how inhospitable environment can you imagine?
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, so if these things can live in such environments, why can't they live between worlds, so to speak? And why not creatures? Because that's what these things seem to be, who can feed from world to world. It's really science fiction-y and bizarre, but we think these things are what they are. In the Bridgeport house in 1974, as we've said before on the show, I was there and I was with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and the assumption was, and I was a 21-year-old seminary student, so naturally we're assuming these are demons, servants of Satan, because this was a very devout Roman Catholic family and stuff was flying off the walls and all this business. But down deep, that didn't feel right to me. It seemed as though there were 4 creatures in there. And when I faced off with them on the Monday night of that case, the 25th of November 1974, I got the impression that these were, in a very broad sense of the word, alien. I don't mean they jumped off some flying saucer somewhere, but just utterly different. Okay? And that they were feeding on things, and they fed on me. And this is how I learned the hard way. You don't get angry, you don't get fearful, you don't get annoyed in the presence of these things, because they feed on it. I became angry at one of these things. You could almost see it standing in front of me, because it was after the little girl I was trying to protect. And I had a physical confrontation with it. It got around me, threw the little girl across the room. And I said, this thing got stronger because it was feeding on my anger about it. And that was a real education, the hard way, and in the farming techniques of these creatures. Because you see them farming individuals. It's interesting, there can be a group of them. Sometimes they'll work as a team. They seem to have leadership. There are 8 or 9 different species. and it's just totally different from what the common understanding is. So we have, I don't know, our technique has developed over the years into we call it
the Peter Pan
the
theory.
Peter Pan theory. In other words, think happy thoughts. And I got rid of the worst poltergeist I ever had to deal with, which was a year after this Bridgeport one, by using a joke book.
No way.
Yes, by bringing in positive energy. Now, that's the caveat here is that the thing, there were 6 of them. They seem to have kind of worn out and gotten a lot to eat as it was. Because the woman in the house had done everything wrong. She brought in a medium who said, "Oh, this is the spirit of some girl who died in the 1820," and all this nonsense that historically was not true. And even if it was true, I don't believe these things anyway. I don't trust these things. And the mediums may be, there are good and sincere ones, but I don't think they're interpreting these things as they should, because they're so limited in their point of view. And I can give you an example of that too later on if you want.
Okay, yeah.
So these parasites were farming this family, and I think you can take it to the point of they were farming perhaps some of our remote ancestors, tribes, and even nations. And I began to suspect that in 88, I should say, when you were just not even a twinkle in my eye. 1988, we were in England. I was doing a presentation at the British Museum, and in the gallery at the time on the right were all these, the ancient history, all these the nice gods, like Osiris and Isis and all the later gods of the Romans and Greeks. And in the other gallery were these nasty little backyard deities that many of whom had demanded human sacrifice in their tribes and this sort of thing. And granted, they didn't live as comfortably as we did, and they saw the dark side of nature, and that they had gods that reflected that. But that doesn't account fully to me for human sacrifice and things of these awful things that went on among some of these peoples. Think of the power of that could be given of the food, as it were, that they could get from the negative energy of such acts as human sacrifice. These parasites, and I think that they may have tried to pass themselves off as gods, and these people believed them. A modern example of that would be 1817 to 1821 in Robertson County, Tennessee, in the Balovich case. So I think that this is what we're talking about. When we're talking about these things farming human beings. And the rather chilling question arises, what influence do these things have in the halls of government? Look at Nazi Germany, and places like this. I mean, and not that like the devil made us do it, because people are responsible for their own actions, but the buttons we see them pushing in families and everything else. I mean, how could this work on a macro scale? It's just really a very chilling thing to consider. So that's the story of the parasites as we see.
Oh my God. Okay, now encountering disappearing buildings and ghosts of people who aren't dead. Explain that.
Okay. Well, you have a lot of confidence in our...
No, I said explain.
We hear what you say. Okay, well, the first part, in Chapter 8, we talk about these strange places, and the first one is we call the Phantom House in Vermont. Now, it was 1970, summer of 75, and I was just off this case, from Bridgeport and this business in 74, and I was a seminary student, and I was in Vermont, which was the area where I had several classmates living, and I was visiting one home there, and it was a lovely evening, and we were sitting out on the porch, and all of a sudden this old battered pickup truck comes bouncing up the dirt road and stops at the house. And these fellows were 2 surveyors from down country, as they call, farther south in Vermont, from the town of, had been working in the town of Johnson. And it took them a while to work up the courage to tell me the story. And my host said, "You're going to tell them or not?" And there was we were having beer, and they were reference to, Paul's going to think we're drunk. But the story, as I heard it, was they were surveying, for a large landowner in the town of Johnson, and they were coming down a hill, and they had were using a U.S. Geological Survey map, which has most of the buildings on it, on the map. But they saw a house at the bottom of the hill by an old dirt road, which was not on the map, and obviously was very old and had been there for some time. So they kind of laughed at government inefficiency when the map production took place. And they got down there, and everything was strange. They said it even felt odd. There were no wires of any kind running to or from the house. There was an old clothesline. There were no cars in the yard, nothing like that. It looked as though it had never been painted, made of wood, of course. And as they stood there on the road looking over the stone wall at this place, a man came around the corner of the house, a big beard like Ben, maybe bigger, and he had an axe over his shoulder and an old hat. And one of the men called to this person, and he stopped as if he had heard a little bit, but he looked as if he couldn't see them. He kind of looked around, and they thought at this point that maybe they ought to back off because, as one of them put it, there are still a lot of strange people in these hills. So they decided they'd look up the records at some other point. Well, they were coming down, doing the actual survey job a short time later, not the same day, but a few days later, and the house was gone. And there was just an old foundation. You could tell that some of the stones were burned, and they were in these surveyors spent a lot of time in town halls and looking through records and getting permits and things. And so they looked in the record. One of them looked in the records and said that there had been a house on that spot, only it had burned down in 1910.
Oh my God!
Precisely. So
no.
I went down there with them, and I saw the foundation and the whole bit, and there was a creeping phlox which grows in areas where there had been fires and this business, and it was just a very rutted old dirt road, and they hadn't. There was no house, obviously. So that was the Phantom House of Vermont.
But how does that happen, Paul?
Well, in our opinion,
I guess in our opinion, it would be that these two surveyors, maybe the ducks just happened to be lined up. Maybe there was some groundwater, some like sandy soils or something. They sort of crossed into a world boundary where they saw this house and this guy doing everything that he would normally do in his normal life. But these two were sort of outsiders in that world.
And the interesting thing with this is that had he seen them, he probably would have thought they were ghosts, because we very often run into cases where the so-called ghosts think we're ghosts haunting them, and they're afraid.
So we're in another dimension. So that house was in another dimension, and they happened to see it?
Well, dimension isn't exactly the right term.
Okay.
These words have dimensions within them. I know everybody uses it interchangeably.
Well, dimension refers to how we currently exist. So currently we exist in a four-dimensional world. So that would mean that if they were in a different dimension, that would be a fifth dimension that they would exist in. So we wouldn't be able to conceive of that. No, they live in perfectly physical worlds that are four-dimensional worlds.
Well, sometimes the other worlds have other dimensions too, because the laws of physics can be entirely different.
Yeah.
Which is why I could stand in the house of the Bridgeport, the kitchen of the Bridgeport house in '74, with 3 policemen on one side, 3 firefighters on the other, and watch a refrigerator float. Okay, because perhaps a world in which the laws of physics are very different, there are a lot of overwashes going on in this house, a lot of intersects, in our opinion, which is why things are floating in the air. It wasn't necessarily some parasite doing it, but the same processes and forces and energies that allowed the parasites to manifest also did things like this. Mm-hmm. That's the way we look at it. Anyway, looking back at it, that's what we seem to think. So, again, a whole new first day of school here for looking at the paranormal. So I think it's probably the most dramatic case I ran into when it comes to disappearing things was or appearing in this case, was the part of Chapter 8 we call a living ghost town in Utah.
Oh, yeah, that's a fun story.
Yeah, and in the 80s, again, before you made my life so fruitful, there was... I was speaking in Providence to a group of I guess, senior citizens, and they were talking about, we were talking about all the various things that happened, and a woman came up to me afterward, and she seemed to be frightened to talk about this, but she said her husband and her and she had been traveling in the West, and they were historians by avocation. They were both retired bankers. So these are not frivolous people. They'd been traveling in Utah, and they were particularly interested in ghost towns. So they wanted to go see this town of Woodard, Utah, and they were told by one of the local historians at a hotel that they visited that there was nothing left there. And so they said they would maybe find some artifacts or something. So down they went, and as they drove up to what was supposed to be Woodard, Utah, they passed a sign that said "Willkommen," like it was in German or something. I said, okay, so they drove up, and they got into the center of this town, which was just relatively ordinary looking, and it had all the cars were all the same, rather boxy, kind of grayish. Although a lot of cars do look like them.
Yeah.
But the people seemed different somehow, and all the signs were in some foreign language. They got out and they were hungry. They wanted to stop at a restaurant, so they went into the local restaurant, and they couldn't understand anything on the menu. Nobody was speaking English, and they ordered by just pointing to stuff on the menu. So the proprietor of the restaurant, at the end, they had a couple of sandwiches which looked normal. They got up and they tried to pay. He looked at American paper money, and he seemed all disturbed. He wouldn't. And then he said words to the effect that we don't take that. And they found out what the language was. And I double checked it with a Dutch friend, and it was Dutch. Because it sounded like Dutch to me. Because there are a lot of words in Low German and in Dutch that an English speaker could pick out. Mm-hmm. So they were very nervous at this point, and so they kind of fished around in pockets and pocketbooks for coins, and the guy reluctantly took a bunch of quarters and stuff like that, and it was very, very cheap for the meal. So they decided they better get out of there, so they kind of went out, and people were standing around staring at their red van, because it was so different from their vehicles, and they kind of backed off when they came down. They said so they went down the road, going very slowly because they didn't want to end up in jail, and passed back into what they recognized as sort of the normal world. And then they mentioned to people later on, and the only speculation was, well, there are Mennonite communities in Utah, but they're not so totally, foreign that they wouldn't recognize money. I mean, they're all out working in the community and this sort of thing, so that didn't hold up. And it was Dutch, apparently. So off they went, and they told one or two people this. They said, that's impossible, there's nothing there. And they didn't go back, but that's the story I heard, and they were very upset about it. The woman kept notes, showed me the notes, and so another example, perhaps, of a strange place that, in this case, appeared.
Oh, wow. This book is, for anybody, you need to get this book. It's absolutely, the chapters and the content in each one of these chapters are absolutely, oh my God. I didn't get the book in time, but I can't wait because, Paul, I have to have you come back on some of these topics. But, okay, so let's move, and Ben too, honey. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave you out. So,
it's okay.
And then, okay, so let's go a little bit further then, and then you say about pushing the boundaries as you find out what the Bible and other ancient documents might really mean. What UFOs, invisible friends, and those footsteps in the attic could be.
Okay,
so
that jumps around in the book, but the Bible, if you read it in the original languages, it can be quite different, particularly Genesis. And a lot of Jewish people are surprised to find out that they don't teach Hebrew in the seminary, and they should, because it's important for reading things in the original. I think if you need to read the New Testament in Greek, and you need to read the Old Testament in Hebrew. Now, the problem is that we don't know what the actual original words were, because we're dealing with century after century of hand copies upon hand copies upon hand copies, with mistakes multiplying as they went. I once saw one document that was traveling in an exhibit, And you could see where one of the scribes, who many of them were semi-literate themselves, had written, "Why did you change the original?" Wrote to the scribe before him. So, and you tear your hair out because what's left of it, because what was the original? There are some ancient documents. I'm thinking of the. It's called the Codex Alexandrinus, and it's a New Testament document. The letters of Peter are in there, and to Timothy, this sort of thing, and it's got leaks where the ink's leaked through to the page before it and changed one Greek letter into another, and that's how it got to the English translation, and it's wrong. So it drives you nuts. So the point being that I went to study Hebrew, and just to read Genesis in the original, and you can the first line of Genesis is, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." All right, that's we all grew up with that. Anybody who was Jewish or Christian, and it's the same in the Hebrew Bible. But if you read in Hebrew, from a certain point of view, because ancient Hebrew modern Hebrew has vowel marks, but there were no vowels. And ancient Hebrew had no vowel marks, and the words are all run together. So when you read it from in a really literal sense, it doesn't say what I just said. It says, in the beginning, or when it began, the shining ones, Elohim, as we said, the shining ones, stood upon the heights and looked down with pleasure on the highlands and the lowlands. Or you could read heights as the sky, even. All right. So here we go. Are we going to get into ancient astronaut theory? Well, not necessarily. Okay, maybe. But at the same time, if you look at the multiverse perspective, where buildings and towns appear and disappear, where people can show up in the airport in Tokyo in the 1960s and be wearing clothes from no known material, carrying passports from nations that never existed, and then ended up running off into the blue. I mean, when these things happen, you could have people or a whole group of people stumbling across or inadvertently ending up from one very different world where there was high technology to another, to this world that we know as the world of our remote ancestors, who were the people in Genesis, or the Atrahasis of the Akkadians, or the Karsag epics of the Sumerians, all of which are contemporary documents, all written around the same time. They're all saying more or less the same creation story and everything else. If you read Genesis, taking out divine imagery and the poetic stuff, and just read it as it is in Hebrew, the point of view is essentially that you're looking at people who came from somewhere or somewhen, who had the most high was their chief, who lived either on a high mountain or on an island in the sky, and you had an agricultural colony established at Ekden, which still exists in the Kadisha Valley of Lebanon, if it's the place they're referring to. And you have, particularly in the Karsag epics, you have the wife of the Most High, Nin Karsag, taking saliva and blood and using it to create from the native species a kind of worker race. Now, as you know, saliva and blood are prime DNA sources. I mean, what are we talking about? DNA, gene splitting here? What are we talking about? Blending it with the blood and the saliva of their people. So, I mean, you tell me. But so I'm just saying that this is what we may be reading instead of a divine narrative. We may be reading that on an entirely new level, the creation of our species by alien or very similar race from another part of the multiverse. I mean, this is a whole new kind of prehistory we're looking at here. You look at real history, or history that is accepted, and you have the Sumerians, the Karsag epics that they produced. Their civilization arose about 8,000 years ago so quickly that there's no way to explain it, really, in any normal sense. It was like they were bean farmers one year, and the next year they were lawyers and doctors, and they had sophisticated institutions like schools and hospitals and sophisticated governments, law codes and this sort of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense.
No, it's just, I mean, how did that happen? And interestingly, when we talk about not these documents not necessarily being what we think they are, it seems, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, and this idea came up, his name was Langston, Dr. Langston, Stephen Langston, in the 1930s. Not the guy from the Da Vinci Code, but this guy was a folklorist and an archaeologist, and he came up with the very disturbing idea at the time that people did not start out as polytheists, as worshiping many gods. They started out, seemingly, in the remote past, worshiping one god, or a family of like a father god, a mother god, and us, or at least a god who was their child. So that took different forms. But all of a sudden, the Sumerians were doing that, and all of a sudden, their civilization begins, and all of a sudden, they're worshiping thousands of demigods and demons and spirits and all this, who had not been conceived of before, as far as we know. And this seemed to happen all over the world. So what prompted this? Was it parasites coming in and pretending to be gods? There are stories, particularly from the ancient Sumerians, of the gods personally flying from one city to another to visit one another, and then leading wars of the gods, featuring the stories of just about every civilization, particularly India, where there's evidence of ancient nuclear explosions, as a matter of fact. And you've got these gods personally leading armies against each other and founding the first known cities, Uruk and and other cities that are known from the various earliest beginnings of all these documents, including Genesis. So I think we're looking at, again, these documents may not be just divine poetry. They meant to inspire you to love God. They may be a real alternative history that may actually have happened.
Oh, okay. Now, you also mentioned UFOs.
Well, sure. When you have, I counted, I think it was 360 different stories in the Bible alone of some kind of craft or object landing, floating, moving at great speed.
I mean, look at the prophet Ezekiel with the chariot of fire, or the wheel of fire.
Well, the wheels.
The wheels of fire, yes.
And, I mean, how would they even imagine such things? There's prophet Ezekiel, he's sitting there, and also these beings come to him in this circular object that looked like it had wheels turning on it and all this. And I'm not aware of any ancient religious symbol that looked like that. But again, these discs seem to come out of nowhere in a lot of these tales. And not only the Bible, but some of the ancient Egyptian documents. The whole Amenhotep I, the whole other way, who was a really strange guy, Pharaoh of Egypt, and he had this experience of, he called it the sun disk, and all of a sudden he did away with all Egyptian religion, and all you could do was worship the sun disk, whatever that would mean, and you can see the symbols painted on some of the temples. And it's a disc with all these rays coming down. Yeah, it could be the sun, but it looks to me, and a lot of other people, like he had this incredible UFO experience in the Egyptian desert. Then all of a sudden, his son, none other than Tutankhamun, King Tut, comes along and restores ancient Egyptian religion and gets rid of the whole sun disk thing. Yeah? And he was a big hero for that. So he was a very important pharaoh, not just because his tomb was full of stuff that hadn't been pillaged and found in the 1920s. So you had that going on. So this seemed to be a global phenomenon. If you look back at the history of many different nations and cultures way back, you have the Dogon people of Africa who knew about some stars that hadn't even been discovered yet when they were discovered, and so that's where they came from. That's where their ancestors came from. And look at us. And we talk about this in our book as well, Norene. Isn't it always funny that we always think of God as being in the sky? It's always the sky gods.
Yeah.
And hell is like under the earth, and we're thinking of Enoch. We talk about Enoch, obviously an ancestor of ours. The great grandson of Noah, and he was a sort of pet of these other people, and he describes in the Book of Enoch, which they didn't let into the Bible because it was too weird, but it's a very, very interesting document. He describes flying around in a craft with two of the, well, I suppose we would call them angels, going to meet the Most High, and he was a sort of liaison between the Most High and the native peoples, the indigenous peoples of that area, Middle East, of course. And he talks about flying over what sounds to me like the Rift Valley that runs from the Middle East down to Kenya all the way. And at the time that it was volcanic, it's possible that this was a time that these legends came from that were written into Genesis. Into the Book of Enoch. And he describes these members of the group, Elohim's group, or members of the Elohim, who had violated some non-fraternization rule and had intermarried with the daughters of men. That's what Genesis calls it. And had intermarried with the local human women, and had children by them who became the Nephilim, these giants, or the Bible calls them men of renown. I mean, what is this? How is this necessary to any sort of faith? So he describes seeing that they have been punished by being put in this volcanic rift valley, if that's what it was. And so I can just see it. Here are our legends of hell, fire and brimstone. Here are our legends of God being in the sky. You know, I mean, God. We're people of faith. God is everywhere. You know.
Yeah.
But we always think of heaven as being in the sky and hell being under the earth or some kind of thing like that. You can just see how it developed that way, and people take it literally rather than looking behind the paranormal, as it were, as we try and do. So that's essentially what that was.
Okay, and what about invisible friends?
No, that was interesting. We're always interested when children talk about invisible friends, okay? And the particular case I talk about in the book, and we talk about in the book, is it was a case that I investigated in 2004 when I was in Florida, speaking against my better judgment at a conference for beginning ghost hunters. And okay, because I would discourage them.
Yeah.
So one of the staff at the hotel knew what I was doing and said, he was very worried about her nephew who had this invisible friend. So, you hear this. You want to check it out because particularly when children are involved, we get concerned.
Yeah.
So I went over to this house, and I was only able to go this once. But I expected to find an introverted child, who kind of didn't like strangers. And I was like, but I found this bubbly, extroverted young boy of 10 years old, played baseball and was interested in what I did because I was a journalist. He was interested in becoming a journalist when he grew up. And talk about a normal kid. Is more normal than many. But at the same, we got around to the subject of this invisible friend who had the same name, who was born exactly 100 years after the birth of this boy. So we're talking, well, it would have been later in the early, I should say, in the 22nd century. Okay. Now, this kid how's he going to think this stuff up? I suppose if he reads science fiction, but he wasn't too interested in that, because I asked him. And I felt that boy enter that room. And you've done this as long as I have, and Ben can do the same thing. You're not doing the medium thing or the psychic. You know what to look for. And I felt a very positive presence of a young boy. And the story behind this essentially is after I got to what I think was more or less the bottom of it, was that this boy lived in a parallel America, or at least a parallel Florida, which, you couldn't make this stuff up. Florida was part of this empire, a very benign empire, not like Rome or anything, which went all the way up the east coast of North America, all the way to Labrador in Canada. So this vast, long coastal empire, and Florida was very largely an agricultural and cattle raising. Now, a lot of people don't realize Florida really is a very big cattle raising state. They used to have an awful time keeping the alligators away from the cows. So it was. So this is not entirely fanciful, but as far as the huge population and the tourism, and that didn't seem to be a big deal in this guy's. And then it was a whole different history, and it was just absolutely fascinating. Now, how this kid could have even thought of this, particularly when he was not introverted, is just beyond me. So I really felt that this was a true story, and that was one example, again, I think perhaps of a parallel reality.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because this boy lived in a world where the laws of physics were such that they could visit, that's the word he used, visit, neighbors in other realities. In other words, they had some other name for it. I didn't quite get it. But it was just absolutely amazing. So another example of an invisible friend, the case Ben and I were both involved with, was Ashwar.
Oh, yes. Yes. Ashwar, the tree dweller. There we go.
Yeah.
So essentially, when we were investigating this case in Litchfield County, for how many years have we been doing it? 10
Connecticut.
years?
Yeah, we've been working on 11 years.
11 years. There we go.
It's one of your first cases starting in 05.
That's still a case.
It's still a case, yeah.
It's still a case. So,
That's the case.
the little boy that was living with his grandparents there and his mom, he was about, what, like 2-3 years old?
He was 4.
He was 4.
Yeah.
There we go. He was about 4 years
I keep
old.
the notes.
Yes. So he was about 4 years old at the time, and he started telling his mom about Ashwar, who lived in a tree outside. So we were at one point doing some filming of night photography or whatever outside.
We were making a pilot for a television show that never got anywhere, so we were
unfortunately. So we were just sort of messing around with this new infrared camera that we had, and we decided, or my dad decided to just sort of point it up.
Well, I remember you
this
weren't involved
tree.
in the conversation, but when the little boy told me that his invisible friend was in that tree, so we came out and we decided to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't a part of it, but I remember you telling me about it.
Yeah,
So,
well, you were there when we took the picture.
oh, I was
Yeah.
there.
So I just pointed the camera up into the tree, and and people can see it if they wish, at our Facebook page, Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, the radio show Facebook page. The first video is of this thing coming down out of the tree. You can see it about 6 seconds in, and it looks almost like a tadpole coming down, and then it gets to a certain point, and the whole frame washes out and it disappears. And
It's really strange.
was this Ashwar? I mean, now interestingly enough, the boy said that her people, Ashwar was female, her people lived in trees. And we assumed that it was spelled ASHWAR.
But it was actually spelled ACH. UWAR. I believe.
UAR. Well, that's
UAR,
translated into English. But
Well, which essentially means the tree dwellers. And wait, which native culture?
it was Central and South American natives
There we go.
would talk about these sort of tree-dwelling spirits, right? So,
Now, how would a 4-year-old kid know anything about that?
absolutely. Oh, yeah, he knew a lot about Ashwar, but probably not from making it up.
No.
Now, interestingly enough, he's gotten older now, and he doesn't have these Ashwar experiences anymore, and that happens with a lot of children. The invisible friends disappear at a certain point, maybe when multiverse awareness is, as we might call it, is educated out of them in schools, perhaps.
Yeah.
Now, there's a sequel to that, in a way, because there's a fellow called Gregory Harold in Florida who has become a friend of ours, and he did so by sending photographs that he had received, that he had gotten from security cameras in his own yard in the 1970s, and you can see creatures like this tadpole-like thing in there, and that's what drew his attention. And so other people apparently have recorded these, as it were, on the visual media, and there you have it. But as far as whether these things come across to us, as we said, parasites we believe are living creatures farming people and this sort of thing, but we think of them as demons. Maybe these tree-dwelling beings are something else, and we interpret them as invisible friends and tree spirits. So that was an example of that. But again, people can see that video by going to the Behind the Paranormal Facebook page.
And what about footsteps in the attic? Could that really be?
Well, Footsteps in the Attic, I think the publisher put that in there as a sort of in-joke, because Footsteps in the Attic was my 2002 book that recounted a lot of cases up to that time that people were interested in, including the original story of the Phantom House in Vermont, and the worst the chapter we called it the baddest poltergeist in New England, which was the one the year after the Bridgeport one, and this is in New Haven, Connecticut, and the woman, as I said, had done everything wrong, and I mean, just made it worse. And that's the one we got rid of by using a joke book, okay? And that happened by the girl, the daughter. There was a daughter and a mother, and they had owned a store underneath. They had a little apartment over their store, and this had become so bad, the poltergeist activity. I mean, it's the worst I've ever seen. It was worse than Bridgeport. There were holes gouged in the walls, and there were obscenities like scrawled across. Something like closest I've ever seen to Hollywood. The concept of these things. The first thing that happened to me, a huge leather armchair, came flying at my head, and if the woman hadn't screamed, and I hadn't turned around and ducked, I don't know what would have happened. So really the worst. But it had kind of run its course to some degree. They don't always do that. But I brought the daughter back, and a friend of mine who was later became a priest, that's how I knew him from the seminary, and that we sat down there and we yucked it up. We brought in positive energy just by just having a great time. The thing was never seen or heard from again.
Oh.
So I mean, positive energy. As we say, the Peter Pan theory.
Oh.
Think happy thoughts.
Yep.
All right. Now, I have the chapters in front of me. Are you willing to just take one little piece out of each chapter? What I'm really interested in. Let's just go down the list. Okay, chapter 3, Winter Holidays, Angels and Miracles. Which one would you like to talk about?
That's appropriate for now. Ben, you want to just? There's a picture of Ben.
Yes.
As a young lad preparing to scare the demons on Halloween, which is what that's really for.
I was Robin Hood.
You were Robin Hood. Yes. It's a cute picture.
I was very serious, though.
Yes, indeed.
Well, show it.
Again, the most ancient holidays, of course, are really Halloween and marking the season of death, and that's very cheerful. But what that was doing was that the Celts and a number of other ancient peoples started their year on November 1st, not January 1st. That was the Romans, who were all that swift on their hind legs most of the time. So what they did was to commemorate the year with the beginning of the year with the season of death, essentially, because things went uphill from there.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So Halloween was, of course, the last day of October, and why the season of death? Because more people died in the winter than at any other time. It was harder to get food. It was cold in the northern hemisphere, and this sort of thing. So people were just not able to survive as readily as they can today. And we all live in artificial environments and pay $300 a month to heat our home. So that's how we begin. And of course, the traditions were, of course, to very often to dress up as demons to scare away the demons and therefore scare away death.
Like jack-o'-lanterns were meant to ward off demons.
Exactly, yeah.
All sorts of things like that.
Yeah. And you gave candy. Of course, a lot of people know this. Trick or treat, the whole idea, you gave candy to placate, or other gifts to placate the demons. People used to put them out in dishes on their front porches or their front stoops in order to placate whatever was out there. Usually it was like a cat or something. I don't know. So
maybe it was the cats.
And then perhaps, and then at moving into the solstice period, when the sun essentially would turn around, and the season of life would begin again. The days would get longer and it would get less cold. People would, as part of these traditions, light huge bonfires in order to bring back the sun. That's still done in Scandinavia and some other places. Then we have, of course, Hanukkah coming in. We talk about that. And Hanukkah has, in a way, a paranormal background. Now, it is not the Jewish equivalent of Christmas. All right. Now, today you'll see a Hanukkah tree in somebody's house, and I think it's pretty much because Jewish kids saw, how their Christian friends made out at Christmas, and they figured, well, look what we're missing. So now people will give gifts at Hanukkah and send cards and have trees and this sort of thing. But that was the original idea, was that Hanukkah was the festival of lights, and the 1st century BC, when the Greeks pulled out of Jerusalem, they had been an occupying army at the time, and that actually it was 2nd or 3rd century BC, it was before the Romans.
Yeah.
They had the Romans at least let you practice your religion, but the Greeks did not. They wanted them to worship Zeus and all these guys. So they essentially closed down Jewish worship. And what happened was that obviously they were defeated by a rebellion, the rebellion of the Maccabees, and you can read about that in the Bible. And they pulled out, but before they pulled out of Jerusalem, they spoiled the oil that was used to burn the lights in the giant menorah in the temple. And the one thing of oil they had, the vessel of oil they had, the menorah burned for 8 days, which was impossible on that amount of oil. So therefore, the Festival of Lights, and therefore a miraculous or paranormal, if you will, sort of occurrence. So there's that, and it also can be interpreted as, to some degree, a solstice feast today. Christmas, meaning no disrespect in any way to Jesus Christ, because the church, Christian church, deliberately adopted pagan festivals to make it easier for pagans to become Christians. And you had the Emperor Constantine, supposedly the first Christian emperor. We have an icon of him right here in our library, but really he only became a Christian on his deathbed. And he was baptized by a priest who would have been considered a heretic by the version of Christianity that ended up resulting from all this. But Constantine wanted to unite his creaky, tottering Roman Empire, which he had inexplicably divided into two halves, and all this stuff that had happened that had made the empire weaker.
It's very confusing.
It's very confusing. And he said, well, they're going to adopt a religion that everybody is going to embrace, because the whole cult of the emperor thing, divine emperor, which the leaders never really believed anyway, wasn't working anymore. So Christianity almost lost out to what was called the cult of Sol Invictus, the invincible sun, because at the solstice period, this actually on December 25th, the Roman calendar, that's when the feast of Sol Invictus was celebrated. But he decided on Christianity instead because he liked it better. So everybody kind of had to become Christian in the empire, which took a long time. And the cult of Sol Invictus, December 25th, that date was adopted as the birth of Christ. So it comes across in English as a rather good pun. Instead of the birth of the sun, S-U-N, you had the birth of the sun, S-O-N, of God. Exactly. So that has stuck. So there are reasons for this. And the whole story of the birth of Christ, which only appears in the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew and Luke, and especially Matthew, is you have a man apparently with no human father, with a very strange star leading these astrologers, or the wise men as we call them today, to the birthplace of Christ, which probably isn't. He's probably about 2 years old by the time they got there. And then you have beautiful music coming from the sky, and the angels singing, all this, which is a beautiful story, but it just reeks of something really otherworldly in a sense that the paranormal might interpret it. The whole life of Jesus, beautiful as it is, ends in after the resurrection, and him being taken up into the clouds on some sort of something. And all the apostles surviving witnessed this, and even said they lost sight of him in a cloud. And they actually, the apostles. So again, all the paranormal implications of this are at times rather staggering. Again, not to denigrate it, because God uses his, her, whatever laws to bring things about. And miracles, as we say in the book too, when we talk about miracles, are not really things that are out of the ordinary. They're a restoration of the world as it should be, when all the worlds come together in the ultimate unity, which is of all the different parallel worlds, which is predicted in a number of theological works, but also in the holographic theory of quantum mechanics, which is, we get into that too. So we're dealing with, again, the winter holidays as perhaps, again, a view into a very different kind of reality.
All right, so in chapter 4, that chapter is on ghosts, parasites, and poltergeists.
Yes.
And you mentioned the Amityville. Can you touch on that one? That one
Sure.
is my favorite.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we need to dig in to get Lorene's letters out of the file. But
Yeah.
again, she wrote to me during that case. And the thing that we get into is, we outline what happened. Of course, there was Ronald DeFeo, accused and probably certainly did murder his entire family, four people, two siblings and both his parents, and he went running into a bar. Ironically, this is in Amityville, New York, in Long Island. The bar is ironically called the Witch's Brew, and told everybody this family had been murdered or shot. Some of them ran back to the house, called the police, and then the Lutz family moves in after that and starts having supposedly all these bizarre experiences, and the kid had an invisible friend and all this business, and strange things would happen, strange dreams and all kinds of, anybody who's read the story has heard of some of the things happening. We list them in the book. Now, the thing that really, the Warrens got involved along with a lot of other investigators. Again, I was stuck in class at the other end of New York, so I couldn't go with the Warrens to this house, but as I heard it from Norene, it was very much as it was in the book. However, Father John Nicola, a Jesuit priest who was the technical advisor for the film The Exorcist, something he regretted till his dying day, excuse me, he said that this whole thing was a hoax. He was one of my mentors. I would see him whenever I was in Washington. And he would, and him saying this was a hoax was good enough for me. And as you can see, there were at least 3 films that have come out of it and a very successful book. And it does kind of make you wonder. Had I been there myself, I might have been able to make a better judgment. But I go through the whole thing and point out some of the controversies and that sort of thing. So I was involved sort of at a distance.
Oh, God, I wish you had been able to go there with the Warrens.
Well, that would have been interesting. Yeah.
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 That was after you're falling out with them, yes?
No. This is in '76. They were involved, and I did not have my schism with the Warrens until '78.
Ah, yes.
Because I bought a case in Rhode Island, and I just didn't. There were a lot of things that didn't add up, and I loved them very much personally. They were like another set of parents for me, because I had lost my father at the age of 7, and Ed was like a father. But I could not. I just couldn't stand by and watch what I thought was things that were going on that really shouldn't have been, that didn't add up to me, and he couldn't accept that. And we had a amicable, pardon the pun, with Amityville, amicable departure. We met at an ice cream shop, and we had a sort of a conference over this, and we shook hands, and I never saw him again. That was in '78.
Wow.
So.
All right, and then in chapter. We don't need to do chapter because you talked about things in chapter 5. Now, chapter 6. Now, you have written the book. That was your very first case, The Village of Voices. Now, would you like to just come back and do a show on that? So we'll hold that out?
Yeah, if we haven't already, sure.
No, we haven't done that yet. I mean, I could have you on for a whole year and probably never finish touching on anything. All right, let's hold that one out. Let's hold that one out because I want you to come back to the show for that one. Okay. Now, chapter 7, you touch on suicide. What do you talk about?
Well, again, it was based on that show that we did, and Ben presented the point of view of teenagers. And you want to just review that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think at the time I was like a senior in high school, so it was. I had like really close friends who were contemplating suicide, and I was talking. I remember this very vividly because I remember talking about his relationship with his dad specifically, and how they had a really big falling out. So he felt pretty alone. And I think the ultimate conclusion that we came to was that you're not alone in the multiverse. Like you're always with somebody at all times.
Yeah, you're always loved, never alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate message that we came to was, it's just you're always loved, and it sounds like a grisly subject when you see suicide on it. But
well, we've been getting questions from listeners, and we were talking about the multiverse. Can't I just pop off and then find myself in a better world?
Well, that's not quite what it does. Not
at all.
No, what it does is it completely separates you from everything. You're in a world of utter aloneness. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I found in working with people who have committed suicide. I mean, just you get this whole thing of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, it's like that episode of Gumby.
Yeah, exactly. The asteroids.
Yes.
Wanting to be alone and then actually achieving that.
Indeed.
But then I spoke from the viewpoint of parents, although not really a viewpoint of me as a parent. And I just laid them out. I said, they're concerned with all sorts of things that really separate them from their children. Now, naturally, it's not easy being a parent. You and I are parents, Norene. Ben has a cat, but sooner or later I'll have children. She's good practice for me having a baby. But you must sacrifice yourself for your children. You can't have it all. You can't have your selfish life and go out partying and being pretending you're still a bachelor or bachelorette and be a decent parent to your children. And it's worth it to give up your life for your children. You really have to do that. Otherwise, don't have children. So I was saying that listen to your children. Very often they have more wisdom than you do. And I think that's really true. And that's maybe how we started. We don't have a perfect relationship, but I mean, apparently it's better than a lot of other people's. And we listened to each other. And it didn't hurt that I worked at home. Not everybody can do that, but I was here when you got home from school. And so at least there was someone who loved you, who was always here for you and your brother.
Yeah, that was nice.
Who was 8 years older than you. So I was on the PTO for 20 years. They should have given me a gold watch when I, finished that.
Decades of service.
Because your brother, Garrett, then we started all over again with you. But it was good. Mm-hmm. So in any case, you really have to be a person who listens. And one thing I do, and this is not really on the subject of suicide, but I always cringe. And you always hear like a father calling a son buddy. He's not your buddy. He's your son. And you can have a loving relationship, but you have to use tough love. You have to have complete attention to them at times, and you can't be thinking of yourself. And there are a lot of things that really make me cringe about that as a father. So anyway, we'll get into all of this stuff, and the idea that if you do this, if you are really in solidarity, as different as you may be from your children, they're not going to think about committing suicide because they're not going to feel alone.
They nailed it.
That's essentially what we did, what we talked about in that show, and we sort of wrote that into a chapter for the book, and because the question always comes up, and the main point from the paranormal standpoint being, you cannot, you make your own bed in the multiverse. If you're a selfish jerk here. Now, suicide can result from mental illness, absolute desperation, not thinking of any way out. But it also has always struck me, and I've been a personal witness to it, and I don't want to get into that now, but it's in a very jarring way. But it can be the ultimate act of selfishness. And as such, what does nature do? Path of least resistance. You're gonna have a lot of lives where in maybe the next one you're conscious of, we are already living in a world of ultimate aloneness. So suicide is ultimate aloneness. Yeah. And that's what we get into.
Okay. Let's skip to chapter 11, possession and exorcism. What about, why do you think you're channeling?
Or what do you think you're channeling?
What do you think you're channeling?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the points of the parasites, and their modus operandi is that they will make you think there's something else. And one of our mottos is, nothing in the paranormal is what it appears to be.
Right.
And a lot of people, or most people, tend to think that it is what it appears to be. If you think you're a medium, or maybe you are, you hear something tell you, well, I'm so-and-so, and I'm this, that, and they will believe it. They don't test it. Now, we'll go into how sometimes, or particularly myself in my years ago, and something will say, the people are convinced, grandma is haunting the house. Well, I'll go in there, it doesn't feel right, and I'll say, I don't believe your grandma. Everything changes, all right? And I'm thinking of I'm thinking of a case when I was working in a psychiatric hospital in upstate New York as a seminary student. And I was in this ward with the staff didn't like to be there at night. They more or less considered it haunted. They joked about it being haunted. Well, it did feel kind of strange.
Yeah.
So the chapel happened to be in that. in that hallway. But there was a woman who was a patient, not necessarily a psychiatric patient, because this is a state hospital in New York, and it had many different kinds of people in it. And she believed she was a psychic medium. And she said there was the feeling of the haunting in the hallway was there was a man who had already passed on, who was waiting for his wife, who presumably was a patient somewhere, and he was going to take her home. I said, okay. So I went into the chapel. I spent the better part of 3 days in this chapel. I don't know what the staff thought. I was supposed to be out visiting the patients. And there was a sort of a quieting and meditative technique that I used. And I'm not doing the medium thing. I'm not trying to contact anything. But sometimes you will pick up a contact from, like if you're standing next to somebody in a line, and sometimes you get talking to them. That's how I look at it. And to make a long story short, sure enough, there was a man waiting to take his wife home. But he was not dead. He was in a parallel world that was not that different from ours, except that you could talk to your neighbors and nobody would lock you up for doing it. He was across the river in Prescott, Ontario, Canada, across the St. Lawrence River, at the railroad station there, waiting for the train to come in from Montreal, and he was going to pick up his wife and take her home. They lived in Prescott, or the Prescott in this world. Okay, I said, my gosh, if you don't understand how the multiverse works, you're going to think it's a dead guy waiting for somebody else to die. What else could it be?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if you have expanded awareness, and if we're right, and we're the first ones who admit maybe the medium was right, maybe we were wrong, because nothing is what it appears to be. But this is that was the clearest impression I could get from a clear conversation, and also the feeling that that this was you could feel the world around him, the railroad tracks, the whole thing, because when these paranormal experiences are taking place, you're partially in the world from which it's coming, which is why I could have a physical entanglement with one of the parasites in the Bridgeport house, because it was partially in our world, I was partially in its, across the membranes, as a physicist would call it, or BRANES, that sort of thing. So there's a whole world here that we're just looking at very narrowly. And so what do you think you're channeling? Just be careful. And one of the things, too, that we point out to mediums is, they'll often be saying, oh, yeah, I sent so-and-so to the light, and, assuming that there's one light as being a boundary or whatever it is of heaven or something. Again, this sort of 19th century, two-dimensional kind of approach to what this is.
Well, I just think it's funny that, they sort of accept information from anything that comes along, where it's if some guy came up to you on the street and said, oh, well, you're going to die in 3 days, would you believe them?
Oh, my gosh, I don't believe people I hear in the street, never mind something comes out of some board, whatever.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, so, but, I'll tell the mediums, that light is a world boundary. It's a brain, B-R-A-N-E. And you send somebody across, you don't know where you're sending them. It could be a hell world.
I know, and you know what? I've heard this so many times, and these people that belong to these paranormal groups, and they'll have somebody in the group that says they're psychic or something, and they can let them release them from our earth and let them go where they should be. And I've heard them telling them to look for the light, go into the light. And how dangerous is that?
Well, so what you're doing is, they're in one alternate reality, one parallel reality. They're partially in ours, which is why people think they're being haunted. And then you send them into another, and they could just be in the same kind of. They could be in a hell world of some kind, the Rift Valley, say, in 100,000 years ago. So you just don't know. It's a very reckless and dangerous thing to get involved with, quote-unquote, ghost hunting anyway. Never mind to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of a recent thing, too. Before, ghost hunters didn't really want to deal with mediums.
Yeah, that's
but now they're starting to work together.
Well, then when I started out, they thought you were nuts for doing it at all. The whole term ghost hunting, is, at least as far as I know, it had been invented by Price, I guess, in the early 20th century. But this is not something you went out and did. The Warrens were very unusual, and me working with them was even more unusual. You'd go to college campuses and speak, and you didn't have any paranormal groups there doing this sort of thing, so it was very unusual at the time. And then now they do it like bird watching or butterfly.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
No idea what they're touching.
No, they don't. They have no idea how dangerous it is for themselves as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know I had mentioned to you about the animals and the paranormal, and I've done, like 4 shows on animals and the paranormal. Was there one in particular? Because you said your animals were different.
Yeah, well, we don't approach it the way everyone else does, as you can tell, I think.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, communicating with your pet Airedale or something. When we're talking about experiences, I'm thinking particularly the cats at our old house.
Yeah.
We lived in a very, I guess whether you were forward and moved, but delightful, kind of a magical place in Cumberland, Rhode Island, in a little hollow in the woods. And it was a very odd house, long. I pretty much built it mostly myself and looked it. And we had a hen house and a little train, one of the large-scale trains that would carry the eggs around to the house in the morning, and that sort of thing. And it was just a delightful place, I think, to grow up. Your brother will certainly say that because he's older.
Yeah.
But we had chickens, ducks, rabbits, and we were able to, and a lot of cats. We had up to 9 cats at any one time because naturally you're in the woods. You want to keep rodents away from the chicken feed and all this business. And they were members. They were all members of our family. All the animals that we had, and they in turn were all friends with the local feral cats and all the that they were. And we used to feed them out on the back deck. Very dumb idea, I know, but you'd see even a porcupine one time, skunks, raccoons, cats, all eating out of the same dish. Not one of them ever got sick. We never had a hint of rabies, never even had any fleas, nothing. Because they didn't come in the house, but still, it was a very, very healthy environment spiritually and physically, I think. There was something very special about that place. We felt very protected there. There's sort of a female presence that protected us. But so and I was a night newspaper editor at the time. I was an editor at the Providence Journal, and you put out the morning paper the night before, so my hours were late. So I'd get home 2 in the morning or so. But so I was home with the boys. My wife worked in an office in another town, and so we were able to watch, say, the cats, for example. And at one, you would see that they had an entire community and a very interesting leadership structure and this sort of thing. And people think of cats as cold-blooded killers who will, kill you as soon as look at you if you're a bird or something. We didn't find that to be the case all the time. Sure, they would hunt things. But there were 2 occasions on which, in one case, a baby rabbit was adopted by one of the cats, would lick the baby rabbit and everything, and the other cats wouldn't bother the rabbit. Another time when there was a baby groundhog, because we had 2 groundhogs, apparently one of them had been killed on the road, and which was not near the house, it was quite far away, but there was, in any case, a baby groundhog, didn't have any parents, and one of the cats adopted the groundhog. And when the rabbit and the groundhog got old enough, they left and went about their business, and we would see them. I believe the individuals from time to time, but the cats never molested them. At one point, there was the alpha cat. There's always a sort of a big cheese, sometimes male, sometimes female, and there was Kitty Wells. I remember what's her name. And they had pretty interesting. We had Cat Stevens and Kitty Wells and Cat Mandu at one point before your time. And then she disappeared for a day, which was not a good sign. So I found her under the house in the crawl space under there. Didn't have any basement, just a crawl space. And it looked to me like snake bite. Not a good thing if it was under our house. But I never saw the snake. But anyway, I pulled the body out and went to bury it. All the cats sat around in a perfect circle. There were 8 left. Sat around in a circle. And as it followed me over to the gravesite, as it were, sat there respectfully as I buried her for a month. They took turns sitting or lying by that grave. Now, Kitty Wells used to hold court out on the back deck on the special cushion we kind of had for it. All the cats would sit around, and she would always have her tail in there because she was the alpha. Now, as soon as the burial took place, Gray Bear put his tail in the air. He came up to me, rubbed against me. That was the sign that he was the new alpha. Okay, so I'm seeing signs of mourning of spirituality, of a paranormal connection, because they would sit in front of her spot on that cushion on that deck for at least a week afterwards as if she was still there.
Wow.
None of them would sit on that spot. And then finally, after a week and a half, Gray Bear took his place there, kind of like the throne, you know. And a lot of people don't really know they're in this case, cats. They don't watch them. They don't have a community they can watch. Scientists supposedly do, but I've never heard anything like this, many of them. So the compassionate cats, that's one of the stories in that chapter on the animals. And then we get a little bit into animal ghosts. I mean, I'm sure you've covered that.
Yeah.
And then probably one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened to me, the phantom deer of Cortland, New York.
Oh, I like this story a lot.
It's just so beautiful. I was in the seminary at the time, and a classmate of mine who lived there called one day and said, we'd come home for summer vacation, and I was getting ready to work in a parish and have a summer job on top of that. And he said, you have to see this. I said, what? He wouldn't tell me. Now, from East Hartford, Connecticut to Cortland, New York is no short ride. So I said, all right. Some told me I should go, so I jumped on my old 1968 Ford Fairlane, and off I went to Cortland, New York. Hours and hours and hours. And when I got there, he still wouldn't tell me what it was. So he said, come on out. So we went out, and it was June. It was kind of chilly, almost July. And we sat in this orchard. Got dark. And I was dozing off. About 1 a.m, he poked me. And all he was point. And out of the woods, across this field, 70 yards maybe, not even that, 60, 70 yards, out came these glowing figures. And I could see that they were deer, or deer-like. And they came, and they just put their heads down onto the grass as if they were feeding.
Wow.
So I was staring. I'd never even heard of anything like this before. I'm trying to snap pictures, all of which washed out. They were all white. And so he said this was only the second time he'd seen it. He'd seen it several weeks before with his little brother. They were out camping there. So land was owned by a friend of theirs. And the little boy was asleep, but my friend had seen it happen again. He hadn't seen it since. And he was hoping that we would be able to see it, and sure enough, I did.
Wow.
The next day, we came. Actually, when he had tried to move closer on that first occasion, and they had scattered back into the woods as if they were afraid, like real deer would. So we watched this. It didn't go on very long, maybe 10 minutes. I just stood there in absolute. I don't even know how to describe it. It was a feeling of divine peace, almost. It was a feeling of having touched something very, very special. It's almost like my Bigfoot sighting, if that's what it was, in September. I don't know if we discussed that yet. That's not in the book. It's too recent. So off they go back into the woods. The next day we came back. We scoured that place. No tracks, no speakers, no cameras, nothing that could have done it. No wires, no droppings on the ground. Absolutely nothing to indicate anything out of the ordinary. So I can't explain it. It was just extremely beautiful.
Oh.
And the phantom deer.
Wow. That's really amazing, Paul.
Yeah, it's just so
nice. Okay, let's just move to the last chapter and go to chapter 14. What is heaven?
Well, we
I made a funny joke the last presentation we did. Because you're like, Ben, what is heaven? And I was like, oh, well, I don't know, Dad. What is heaven?
Well, essentially, we before we get into any speculation, we trace the most ancient, again, from the history, ancient views of heaven and what people believe today. We start with the dream time, as the Aboriginals in Australia call it. And I heard that right out of the mouth of a little Aboriginal elder about 4 feet high on the porch of an old store outside of Melbourne. I was there in the line of duty in 1979, and we were talking to this guy, and he told me I'd do paranormal research. And I was very fortunate because they often don't talk to outsiders. But he said, you're on the right track with this multiverse idea. I was only just beginning to research that at the time. He said, that's what we do. He was a shaman. You have a need here. You go into a world where it already exists, and I guess what a physicist would call, you collapse the wave function. You make it real. You combine the two worlds. He says the only thing you have to be careful of are other effects that could happen from this that have nothing to do with what you're trying to do, and that's what shamans are trained, among other things, to do, is avoid those things. So that was an eye opener. So he began to explain essentially about the dream time as well, a time in the earliest dawn of humanity, when we were unspoiled by maybe the intruders we talked about earlier, genetic manipulation, where 223 genes appeared in that genome that shouldn't be there.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was a great thing. You could talk to the trees, the rocks, everything was a unity, as we talk about the point of the multiverse seeming to be. And so he talked about that. We get into some of the Sumerian, rather depressing Sumerian idea of the afterlife, when you die and you go to a place that roughly translates the house of dust. Mom wouldn't like that. Go back. So, although you had to do something anyway. It's very dreary and kind of nothing to look forward to. You literally eat dust for a year and then you kind of evaporate. I mean, that doesn't sound too good. And then
makes you look forward to it, right?
Yeah, really. And then into the Jewish afterlife, and I love the Jewish attitude and culture, because as a Jewish friend once told me, he said, everybody worries about the afterlife. Well, the dying is the easy part. It's living that we find difficult. And that's such wisdom. And I love working with rabbis, because they kind of, it is what it is. Deal with it. Worry about it, and it's a good attitude. So there is no particular doctrine, Jewish doctrine, of the afterlife. The word Sheol is used and is mistranslated in the Bible as hell, at least in English. At least the implication that we have of it is not what the Jews have of Sheol. It's simply a place of waiting.
I think it's actually like a physical, like an unnamed physical place.
Yeah, again, the parallel world thing was perfectly physical in some points of view. Yeah. There is debate about it among Jewish scholars, but Jesus himself was, I'm convinced, was a member of the Pharisees, who were not a bunch of bums, as they're pointed out, as they're indicated in the New Testament to be. One of the most brilliant groups of scholars in history, I think. And Jesus taught just like one. He spoke just like one, right down to the ideas of the parables. So in any case, I think that this is a great tradition that would fit very well with any follower of Jesus. But Christianity has turned into something else. But in any case, the Jewish idea is very laid back, and we get into that. And there really is no particular vision of that, except to be a good person here, do what you can, fulfill your responsibilities, and everything will be fine. All right. The Christian idea of heaven tends to be very complicated, and there are many different versions of it. But it's ironic. We talk about it in the chapter Zoroastrianism, a religion that most people have never heard of, but that was a tremendous influence on many different modern ideas of heaven. This is where you first see the idea of a good God and a bad God. Yeah, you'd be surprised that people, if you talk to them on the street or anywhere, their vision will be of God, and then his arch enemy, and the equally powerful devil almost. And the whole idea of the war between good and evil, that all came originally from from Zoroastrian. Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism came later. Yeah. But the Zoroastrian ideas were spread about the Middle East in places like Tarsus, where St. Paul was from, in Asia Minor. It's a town which was not a small town by any means. It was on a trade route from the Orient, and all sorts of people met. I almost think of the what's it, Los Eisley, the place in Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie, all kinds of different beings and people from other planets, and ideas are being exchanged. And that's kind of like places like what Tarsus was like. You didn't have, I don't think you had too many aliens, but cantina or anything. But you had a lot of people, caravans coming from every which way, and ideas being exchanged. And Zoroastrianism was spread in places like that. So the Christian idea of heaven very often comes from, I think some of the ideas of that kind. You die, your soul goes to wherever, heaven or hell, or in the case of the Catholics, purgatory or whatever, and then you suddenly, all of a sudden you will arise for a judgment and then go back to wherever you were, or you'll be judged or something like that. It's really rather unclear and a little bit disjointed, and there are different points of view on it. So we get into all that, the Christian point of view. And finally, the idea comes down to, in the last part of the chapter, well, what is it? So these are our goofy ideas. And I think certainly the notions that we've discussed before of complete interaction between these parallel worlds will give us an indication of what heaven could be, in any sense of the word. If you realize that it's not about you, it's about all of us, then perhaps you've made a step toward a more enlightened kind of existence. And the more worlds, I think, will be drawn to you for the path of least resistance when this... well, first of all, we don't... The whole idea of the individual has to be questioned, I think. We have the island theory that we're often dealing with in the Western mind. And without the island theory, the idea that within us, all of our imagination, all of our being, all of everything that we are is inside our brains and inside our bodies. Unless you believe that, then you really can't accept the classic interpretations of ghosts and the afterlife and all this sort of thing. But if you can get beyond that to the idea that we're living many parallel lives and many versions of ourselves, and ultimately we're all one in this, then you have an idea of what heaven may be. You might be able to approach an idea of our idea of heaven, and that's how we end the chapter, that you make your own bed. Maybe in a way heaven is a combination of the best of you from various worlds, and that ultimately the whole thing kind of comes together, as in the theology of Teilhard de Chardin, French theologian, and in the ideas of some of the physicists who talk about the hologram, that eventually everything comes to what Teilhard de Chardin called the omega point, the point of absolute unity. And he of course believes that Christ is like the cosmic Christ who brings us together. But in a non-theological approach, in science, the fringe areas of quantum mechanics, it still holds up. So heaven could be the combination of all worlds. And we get into, in our chapter on evil, we kind of tie into that. We just say, why did God let this happen? When we did that show, it was, I think, a week after the terrible 2012 massacre at the school in Connecticut, in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. Yeah. The children died and all this sort of thing at the hands of a gunman. And we say, why would God let this happen? Well, maybe there are different ideas about God that we went into that maybe is not quite what we think. Maybe not all powerful. Maybe all loving, but maybe can't or won't influence human beings. A lot of the ancient philosophers believed God was fine but didn't care, and that's why these things happen. But only in recent times have people begun to blame God for things. Usually they say, well, we deserved it, that kind of thing, natural disasters. So we get into all that. But our idea is that maybe it really is a perfect creation. Maybe God created a whole perfect, elegant, interactive multiverse because, first of all, we were always taught that when God created the world, it was out of an explosion of divine love. Well, an explosion of divine love, which is supposed to be infinite, would make for a world, infinite worlds, not just one. So that's the springboard from which you can get the idea that maybe it is a perfect elegance, and it really is a perfect creation. But just because in this limited existence that we have a limited awareness of, it's not made for our convenience, and we're not pampered, maybe, and we do things to ourselves like these massacres, then maybe it's not a perfect world. Maybe God is evil or doesn't care. But if you look at the whole picture, maybe it is perfect. Maybe everything is as it should be, and all we have to do is discover it by being multiversally aware, so to speak. And we can find our own way to heaven, perhaps.
Wow.
So that's our...
Wow. This is an amazing, amazing book. let's tell the viewer. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we sign off?
Well, no.
I think that was a pretty good wrap up.
Okay. Well, you didn't say much. Your voice is probably stronger than mine at this point.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm still getting over a cold. So.
Yeah. Right. So.
Excuse me.
In any case, so no, just we might want to just say where people can find out more. Our website behindtheparanormal.com. We have over 700 hours of free recorded shows and podcasts.
So if you have 700 hours to kill.
Yeah, right.
I'm showing your banner with your website.
Right.
Thank you.
And also, just if they want to get the book, Amazon keeps running out. They've been out of stock for 2 days, so we got sick of that. Instead of if your local bookstore didn't get the memo because it was released 2 months early, it confused everybody. You can go to behindtheparanormal.com. You can get the book there at our online bookshop. Just click that, and we'll sign it for you. Same price, and we'll take care. So
you get 2 signatures for the price.
2 signatures for the price of
a regular book. Exactly.
Yes, right.
Awesome. Oh my God, it's going to be an amazing book, and I am going to get the book. And I will have you come back after I read this amazing book of yours.
The publisher was supposed to send you one. They're going to get a piece of book.
Is it going to be on Kindle?
Yes, eventually. A lot of people are asking that, and the publisher said that not yet, but they're going to let us know when they do. Apparently, that's something they do after the initial release.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Kindle's a lot easier to take notes down on.
Right.
Anyway, thank you both so much for being on the show tonight. It was such a pleasure. Pleasure to meet you, Ben, Paul. You're my favorite guest of all time. I love having you on. You just put me in a maze when you talk, and you're so awesome. You're a walking encyclopedia. You know everything.
Tell mom she said that.
Okay, well.
Anyway, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure, and there's people in the chat room that said they're looking forward to buying your book.
That's music to our ears. Schoolboy gets the royalties. Yes.
And again, thank you. Yeah, best wishes and good luck with your book, and I'll be talking with you, and thank you again so much for being, and happy holidays. Thank you.
You too, Norene. Thank you so much.
All right, good night. Thank you. Good night. Oh, everybody, thank you so much for joining the show tonight. Paul is my absolute favorite guest of all time. I just love Paul Eno. He's absolutely brilliant, and he is brilliant. He's got a rare PhD, and I think it's in philosophy. He is known as one of the most intelligent journalists in the field. So anyway, I'm glad you all were here tonight. I hope you liked the show. I want to say thank you to my mods, Royce, Unique Annie, and Crystal for being here. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Please give the show a like. And I'll do some shout outs. Oh, Joyce Lynn had a birthday today. If she's still in the chat room or watching, happy birthday, Joyce Lynn. Anybody else have a birthday? Thank you. Anybody else have a birthday? And let's see, Thursday show. What do I have on Thursday? Oh, Anita, Joe Intenzo is coming back for a second show. It's a ghost story, and it's a poltergeist, and the ghost had a connection to the Nazis. It's a really awesome story, and this is part 2. She wrote a book before that we had actually aired before on her first book with Bill Bean, because Bill Bean was involved in her story, and he was on the show at that time. But Bill isn't coming back this time. Anyway, so she's coming back on Thursday. Don't forget, December 12th, the Monroe House, a sinister, scary evil house that Dave Spinks has been investigating. And I think he investigated that with Sean Austin of the Demon Files, and or was it David Weatherly? I can't remember, one or the other. But anyway, the SOS teamers are coming on the show on December 12th, and the owners of the Monroe House as well, and we'll be talking about that house. And again, Dave will be presenting his evidence and any in the EVPs too that he's captured, which is always a great thing to do on when we talk about a haunted house. And then on the last show of the month, December 15th, Catherine Ramsfield. She is a paranormal forensic, and I'm really excited. She is involved in true crime, serial killers, and she does profiling on dead serial killers. So that is going to be a very interesting show. I found her, and I was really excited that she accepted to be on the show. So with that, everybody, I'll see you on Thursday. Thank you again for being here. I love you guys. Group hug, and let's do some shout outs. All right, Tammy Morrison, Unique Annie, one of my mods, X Group Home Kid, Susie Townsend, Royce. Again, thank you so much to Royce, Annie, and Crystal for all that you do for me. I really appreciate it. David Coffin, thank you, David. Diane Hilbert. Let's see. I know Diane Zeman was in the show too. She was in here earlier. Donna Gorton, Tammy Sifford, Chippa Terry, Aaron Brody, Nuna B, Andrew Cox, Nancy Soplavita, Mary Still, Tammy Morrison, Carl White. There you are from the UK. 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning now. Para Princess Patricia, Jeremy Legas. Hi, honey. Yes, part 2. Oh my God, I've got to get together with Jeremy Legas for part 2. Haunted Road Media. There's Mike. Hey, Mike. Mike Ricksecker. Say hi to Mike Ricksecker. Haunted Roads. Mike has a YouTube channel, guys, and he's also an author. You can find him on Haunted Roads Media. Thanks, Mike, for being here tonight. Let's see. This went too fast. Let's see. Okay, we're Lisa Knox, Lori Miller. Anybody else want to shout out before I close the show? Miller, Sandra Miller, and Miller. Anybody else? Yeah, shout out to Mike Ricksecker, Haunted Roads Paranormal. Haunted Roads Media. And he does have a paranormal team now as well, his own team. Vampire Belial. Jimmy Cortez, hi honey, lots of love to you too. I hope you're doing better, hope you're feeling well. Everybody, Cody Desbians. Actually, everybody too, would you please send positive thoughts and your prayers to Royce Hinman, please, my mod. He hasn't been doing well, and he needs your prayers and your thoughts. Venter Storm. Oh, thanks, Mike. Anybody else want to shout out? And if you're not going to join us, if I won't see you again until after the holidays, happy Merry Christmas. Have a very Merry Christmas and a safe holiday. And hope you enjoy. Anybody else want to shout out? April Fagan. Yes, April Fagan. And I don't know if Joyce Lynn's still in the show or not, in the chat room, but I wished her a happy birthday. Thanks, Lori Miller. All right, so everybody, thank you again for being here. Group hug to everybody. I really. Oh gosh. What's this? Hold on. April Fagan. Hey everybody, let's do a prayers and positive thoughts sending to April Fagan. She just found out some health issues. So put April Fagan in your prayers as well. Lully Tubi, I thought you left. You came back. Yes, Lully Tubi. Yes, honey. Nuna B, I did, honey. I did say hi to you. I did a shout out for you. Junebug 1029. Now, Junebug also, she has a YouTube channel. It's on Wigs, isn't it, Junebug? I've seen your show. I've watched you. Aether Shadow. Okay, so you know what? The Warrior game started a half hour ago, and I'm gonna go watch the game. Love our Warriors. So everybody, have a great evening. I'll see you on Thursday. Okay. So have a great evening. Be well. Big hugs. I love you guys, and I will see you all hopefully back on Thursday. So good night, everybody. I love you. Thank you so much.